So here's my HDR style image created using photo merge exposure. The next step is to convert it to mono. But first I'm going to crop the image to improve the composition, get rid of some of these extraneous areas at the foreground here, and get rid of areas that I don't need to worry about. So I'm going to draw a rough crop marquee around the area I'm interested in. That looks about right, and then simply hit return to execute. Now to convert to mono. I'm going to use my favorite method, which is a solid color adjustment layer. I select that option and use the HSB fields to set the hue to 0, saturation to 0, and brightness to 50%, which gives me a mid-tone grey. I then change the blending mode of this layer to hue, and that has the effect of disguising the color information in my image. Now I want to boost the tones in my image, but I haven't got a suitable adjustment in the list of adjustment layers. So I'm going to start by duplicating my image layer by dragging it onto the Create a New Layer button. And now, on this duplicate, I'm going to go to Enhance, Adjust Lighting, Shadows Highlights. In the Shadows Highlights dialog, what I'm going to do is to lighten the shadows quite a lot, dragging the slider up to maybe about 55. I'm then also going to darken the highlights, maybe take those to about there. And then to boost the contrast again, I'm going to pump the midtone contrast way up to plus 100. That's about the effect I want, very like your traditional HDR image. If anything, it's better to overdo the effect at this stage and then adjust it, if necessary, by reducing the layer opacity later. That's taken care of the midtone contrast, but I think the extremes of the tonal range need a bit of work as well. The problem with using shadows highlights is that because it's not an adjustment layer, I can't revisit that adjustment. All I can do is further modify the already edited version of the image I've just made modifications to. So what I'm now going to do is apply a levels adjustment layer. And what I'm going to do is bring the end point sliders, the black point slider and the white point slider, inwards so that I darken the shadows and brighten the highlights respectively. The danger of doing that, though, is that I'm going to bring these sliders in past the edge of the tonal information in the histogram, and that means I'm going to be clipping some detail to black or white. So just to check that I'm not clipping any information in areas that I want to preserve, I'm going to hold down the Alt key or the Option key on a Mac as I move each slider. As I do that for the black point slider, you can see areas of clipping appearing as I move the slider. Now I don't want to take it too far because I'll be destroying all that shadow information that I've taken so much trouble to preserve, so I'll just bring it in a little bit so that only the very darkest tones are forced to black. That's probably enough. And again, for the white point, I'll hold down the Alt key as I move the white point slider inwards. And I'm not too worried about introducing a little bit of clipping in the very brightest parts of the image, such as the lights and the window at the top right, where there were some blown highlights anyway, but I don't want to introduce too much in the rest of the image, so I'll keep it, I think, to about there. And I think that's boosted the contrast in my image just right. The only problem now is that I've brought out some of the detail in this cluttered area in the back of the image, so the detail is actually competing a bit too much with the detail in the car itself. So what I'm going to do about that is, I think, knock back that adjustment in that area. So I'll just zoom in a bit on this area. And what I want to do is mask the adjustment I've just applied in this background area. So I'll click the mask thumbnail to make sure the mask is selected and switch to my brush tool. Now I'm going to make the brush as soft as I can, and I'll do that by holding down the Shift key and tapping the left square bracket key 4 times to get the brush as soft as it can go. And I'll then reduce the brush opacity to something like, say about 25% or so. I'll then make the brush a suitable size. I think I'll start with a fairly large brush to fill in large parts of the area. So I'll tap the right square bracket key to make the brush large and just paint once over the area that I want to mask the effect in. And you'll see that where I've painted appears in a grey tone on the mask, indicating that the effect is being knocked back in that area. So I'll reduce the brush size by tapping the left square bracket key and just touch up the edges of that area. And what I'll do is use some of these natural edges in the image itself to disguise the edges of the area I'm affecting. I don't have to be too precise, but if they roughly follow the edges of objects in the image, it won't be too obvious that I'm applying some sort of effect there. So that's the outline of that area done. What I can do to just check how that's shaping up is hold down the Alt and Shift keys and just click that mask, and it appears as a red overlay on my image. So I can just check that I haven't left out any areas of it. The one risk with this method is that the effect is cumulative, so if I paint over the same area more than once, you might just be able to see I'm actually making that red tone darker, and you'll see on the mask there I'm making that mask a little bit stronger. But I think in this case that's not going to be too much of a problem. If I was being very careful about this, I'd be very precise and paint with a grey tone that I sampled from the swatches palette rather than using brush opacity, because with a grey tone I can only lay down that grey tone. I'm not risking changing the effect by painting over the same area multiple times. Here though, I do want to knock back the contrast in the darker areas of this cluttered background a little bit more, so I'm actually going to paint over some of these darker areas once more, just to knock back the contrast even more in those areas. And if you want to see how that's shaping up, you can Alt-click on the mask thumbnail to display the mask itself in the main image preview window. Alt-click again to show the image again. So if I toggle this mask on and off by shift-clicking on it, you should be able to see that actually the contrast is being knocked back a bit in that area, or rather the contrast boost is being reduced.